So the first panel, if I could welcome our first panel to the stage, will envision provocative scenarios about government operations 20 years in the future. They have all been authors of chapters for Government for the Future. Mark Abramson, our first executive director, will moderate the panel. Panelists, all of whom bring great experience working in and with government, include Darrell West, who is the Vice President of Governance Studies and the founding director of the Center for Technology Innovation with the Brookings Institution. Hollie Gilman, who is a lecturer with the Columbia School of International and Public Affairs, a fellow with New America, and a senior fellow with the Georgetown University's Beck Center. Hollie previously served as an open government and innovation advisor at the White House Office of Technology Policy. Lori Gordon, who is a strategist with BrainQ and advises governments on strategic foresight and related issues. Lori serves on numerous advisory boards and international standards bodies, including NIST. And Shelley Metzenbaum, who is senior fellow and founding president of the Volcker Alliance, and whose many leadership positions in government and academia include service as the associate director for performance and personnel management at OMB. Mark, take it away.
Okay, well, I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to be part of this panel. I'd like to tell you a little bit about this panel, because what we did is, I must admit that I had a bright idea, and I want to add an asterisk. Some of my bright ideas have been fine. Others of my bright ideas have not been quite as bright as I thought, but I'd like to tell you about a bright idea that was a success. IBM came to me, my friends John Kaminsky and Dan Chenik said, would you be interested in doing a book to look back over the past 20 years? And I said, well, I've kind of been there for the past 20 years. That was not the most, I don't know if I were to read reports that we put out in 1999. But then we kept thinking about it, and I said, I have an idea. I'll look back if we can also look ahead. I said, what interests me now is to really look ahead for the future and the next 20 years. So we had that idea, and then we divided up the book, so which all of you will receive today, into two parts. Part one is a looking backwards at what's been the impact of all the things we've talked about over the past 20 years. Part two was really the fun part of the book for me, and I'd like to thank my colleagues for making it a fun project. It's because in my career, I've actually had some unfun projects, but this was a fun project. And what we had an idea, the bright idea I was talking about, is let's send out an email and ask people to send us a one-page idea on what government would look like in the future. And we have two of the winners. We had a competition for ideas. So two of the chapters you'll see are from people who we did not know. All we had is a one page, which was kind of fun to read. And then we did go to people I've known, and we've known, and I now am very precise with my language. We have people I've known a long time who are also friends, but they're long-time friends. So I'm very careful now about my language. So I have people I've known a long time and people I've only known a short time. So what we're going to do is start off with somebody I've known for a long time and ask Shelley to talk about her chapter, because what we did is for people we knew, we asked them specific things that we wanted them to speculate on, and people who have thought about that. So Shelley has spent her career thinking about data and analytics. So we asked Shelley to say, so let's continue your thinking 20 years from now. So Shelley, I want you to tell us, where are we today, and where are we going to be, we hope, in 2040?
So let me start with where we want to be in 2040, if you will. Because I think where we want to be in 2040 is where we want to be today, but we're not quite there today. And I'm just going to talk about this not in terms of the data, but what are we really trying to accomplish? And I'd say we want data and analytics to help us in a few ways. One is improving outcomes. and improving outcomes both by reducing or solving problems and reducing risks, and basically by pursuing opportunities. Beyond that, we want the data and analytics to help us inform priority setting. Government, and when I say we, I mean government in this case, okay? But government working with people who the government's serving. So in terms of, we also want data to help us and analytics to help us with priority setting. Government can't afford to do everything all the time. Where should they focus first? Where are the clusters of problems that are worse than other places that need attention, or the opportunities? And then the third is you want data, in addition to informing the choice of individuals and everything, is to actually help people understand what their government is doing and why and how they're doing it and how well, so that people trust government, because we need government. And we need it to work well, and if people don't trust it, they're not going to resource it, so we're not going to be able to do government. So where are we today in bringing that vision alive? Well, the answer is we're all over the map. We basically have some folks like NOAA who are putting data out all the time, doing amazing things and helping others do amazing things with data and analytics that help us on our daily decisions. We're all using that data all the time, even though we don't see the NOAA branding. But I'll give you 3 short examples of really big missed opportunities. 1, water quality, drinking water quality. Okay, citizen confidence reports. First of all, our drinking water suppliers are collecting data every day at the local level. We're supposed to citizen confidence reports as residents of communities that come in PDF forms. How does Flint, Michigan happen when we've been getting citizen confidence reports about our water quality for decades, okay? Second one, I'll give you Social Security. I had the joy of going to a Social Security office the other day. My spouse qualifies me now for spousal benefits, and we both had to show up. And aside from the basic fact that there wasn't a good checklist that told me what to bring to the office, there was this really long line of people all showing up at 9 o'clock, and I'm like, we've got an appointment. Do we have to go in that line? So I could go on to that Social Security office and look at what Google tells me in terms of time of day and day of week they're the most crowded. That doesn't really help me, though, the way the government set it up for actually choosing that time, because I need to know by type of procedure I'm going through, what the wait times are, how much I should plan for, et cetera. That data all exists. It sits there when I'm in the Social Security office. They give it to me. Don't just give it to me there. Give it to me in advance so I can plan, and beyond that, make decisions. And a third one that I'll just sort of point out to you in terms of problems is one that, since I'm talking to an office, this applies to federal, state, and local. We're seeing amazing things happen often at the city level. But I'm going to focus on the federal level because we're in DC. Office of Personnel Management. Okay, retirement benefits or time to hire. We've got all the data. It's sitting there. OPM actually puts the data out on retirement benefits and the backlog, including how long you have to wait for benefits, but it's not analyzed in a way or even picked up by journalists in a way that anybody can use. And we could also be doing comparisons about time to hire and retention rates, turnover rates by profession, comparing across programs. We don't do it. So my vision is that we've got this world that uses the data that we have or that we go out and get in much smarter ways to make better decisions, and that we communicate it so people can make those decisions and they understand the way it's communicated.
Well, thank you, Shelley. So now to one of our new friends who we had a one-page paper, a proposal that talked about network government. And my colleagues John and Dan and I have read a lot about network government, and we never completely understood it, but Laurie explained it to us. And we said, now if she could explain it to other people, we're all set. Okay, Laurie, so tell us, where are we today, and what do you mean by network government? It sounds terrific.
Right. Well, I think Donald Kettle did a really good job describing it with Brookings. But I have a slightly different take, I guess. And so my perspective is very simple. It's the interchange and exchange of data, systems, and technology. And do we do this today well? Not as well as we could. We're often individually thinking about our own data. Each agency has its own processes, congressional requirements, funding limits. We use bespoke or COTS technology. So we're very specific in how we're thinking about that data. But I will say that CBG has been thinking about this since the 1990s and 2000s. And one thing that I feel like the good news that the idea of network government has been moving forward because we're advancing personal technology, social media, and as we do this as employees and staff of these federal agencies, we're sort of pressing forward and asking this from our agencies. So I'm really focused on data. How do you aggregate the data? How do you process it, analyze it? And how do you tailor that data to individual citizens? And so I would say, in a nutshell, in 2040, we will be doing that very thing. We'll be tailoring data to the individual citizen. And just to comment on some of in the book, we started, Baltimore City Stat in 2003. Decades ago, collecting and aggregating data to use it for, citizens and improve public service. And today, GSA has this ECTO office where they're looking at emerging technologies, AI, IoT, robotics process automation. So all those things, virtual reality. How are we aggregating that data through those different technologies? So we're seeing government network more around this advanced technology so that we can really analyze it and produce better insights. But what we aren't seeing is how to restructure the government itself around this. We're still working from this hierarchical structure, but a more decentralized arrangement would probably enhance your ability to gather that data, especially in sensors networks. Smart cities are doing a great job. Cities are doing a great job to aggregate this for public works, quality of life. But hopefully we can transfer this to the federal level as well.
Good. Well, thank you, Hollie. Hollie came up with a one-pager that talked about the relationship between the government and citizens, which we've talked about for a long time, but she had some ideas for what it's going to be in the future. Hollie?
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. And thank you to Dan and John and Mark and to Ruth. And it's really a wonderful event. It's nice to see so many colleagues in the audience, including a bunch of the colleagues from the Beck Center. So this is fabulous. So I think, I'm glad to be coming after these two comments because I think I can piggyback nicely off of what Shelley and Lori have been saying. When I talk about civic engagement in the future, I think about the current crisis we have where people do not trust their government, and there really is a legitimacy crisis, and you're seeing it across democracies, you're seeing it globally. And one of the trends that's really interesting is that when you ask people in the United States on the local level, they have much more trust in their local and city government. And so I think that offers an opportunity to think about the institutional structures that we could build to tap into that energy, excitement, and the experimentation happening on the local level, but to think about how you could scale it. Because right now, a lot of these initiatives suffer from being ad hoc or being limited or having transitions in political leadership. And so in the book, I talk about how we could build something that I've been calling a civic layer, thinking about how do you institutionalize these mechanisms so that you can think about a federated structure. So you're tapping into that expertise on the local level, but you're providing some structure around it. And I'll give you 3 examples of how this could potentially play out in practice. And so the first, building off of Shelley's comments, is thinking about how you release data. So it's not just enough to make that data open, but to think about how you really equipped citizens on the ground with that information. And a great example are the user testing groups that are happening around the country. Started in Chicago, now Miami is doing them, so is Boston. And this is where city officials work directly with residents, many of whom have no tech literacy training, to ask them, what is the information that you would want for us to release? And people are compensated for their time. And it shows people leaving City Hall to actually go out into communities and talk to people, in particular marginalized communities who are not usually in this policy process. And then a second way is how governments themselves can leverage this data for more innovative policy outcomes. So a great example of this is New York's Office of Public Engagement. It's the first unit of its kind in the country, and they've been leveraging data, thinking about what are the benefits that people are eligible for. And they actually go door to door, and they say, I'm from the city government, you're eligible for these public benefits. I'm going to make an appointment for you, and I'm going to follow up with you to make sure you have what you need for that appointment, to make sure you're not waiting in line at the Social Security Administrative Office, and to make sure that you're able to actually secure those benefits. And then finally, I think there's a lot more opportunities around collaborative and participatory policymaking. And this is not to necessarily replace representative democracy, but to think about how you could augment and create more participatory opportunities for people on their day-to-day governance. And we've seen some really promising models of this on the local level, whether it's things like participatory budgeting, where you're giving people a portion of public monies and allowing them to allocate them, or models like the citizen jury, where you take a representative sampling of people and you give them information so that they can take that information in an accessible way back to the community. So these are just some of the examples, but I think the civic engagement of the future needs to really think about how you build those institutional supports and then how you leverage advances in technology while also tapping into people's local level expertise.
Well, thank you, Hollie. So that was terrific. And now I have a quick story about Darrell. And I want you to know that some things in my career have come easily and some things were hard. So I wanted to tell you about an easy one. All I had to do was open up my email, and I get a lot of emails each day, but I open them. I really enjoy reading my email, if anybody wants to send me an email. So Brookings sent me an email about a new book by Darrell. So I know Darrell, and I clicked on, and the title, they had the book cover, was called The Future of Work. I go, well, that blends in with what we're doing here, the future work. So I called you or sent you an email, Darrell, I'm not sure. I said, Darrell, I like the title of your book. I think it's applicable to what we're trying to do at the IBM Center. Could you write us a chapter on your thoughts of the future of work? And the thing that's terrific about Darrell is he's really short and to the point, and he says, sure. I said, well, thank you, Darrell. And we had a chapter in the book. So I don't want to make people think it's easy. I will be glad to tell you anytime the hard parts of the book. But one of the easy parts was being in communication with Darrell. So Darrell, what's your thoughts?
Okay, well, thank you, Mark. And if you really enjoy getting email, I can sign you up for some e-marketing services. So we can really satisfy that. I do want to congratulate the IBM Center for their 20th anniversary. It's a terrific achievement. The organization has done great work over the years. It's amazing that there are 350 reports and 23 books that have come out. So congratulations to Mark and Dan and Jonathan and John for all the terrific work there. So in terms of where the government is now and where it needs to go, in general, I'm an optimist in the sense that we can see a lot of technology innovation already taking place, especially in the federal government through remote work, cloud storage facilities, the use of mobile solutions, and so on. But clearly, there's a lot more work that needs to get done. And so I hope that by 2040, many of the things that I talk about in my future work book actually do come to fruition. And our opening speaker talked about the importance of challenging the status quo, and I think we really need to do that, especially in the federal government. There are all sorts of amazing technologies that we're seeing in the private sector: AI, machine learning, robotics, the use of data, the Internet of Things, virtual reality, the use of sensors. Government agencies are starting to use these things, but clearly have a lot of progress that needs to be undertaken. So, for example, one thing that I hope the federal government is able to deploy over the next 2 decades is artificial intelligence and greater use of data analytics, because we know that AI can improve decision making by basically analyzing data in real time and providing high quality and fast feedback to people. The federal government sits on a gold mine of information, but only mines a small fraction of that. And so I hope that it can integrate information from a variety of different sources, analyze the material, and then help officials to make decisions based on up-to-date information as opposed to information that may be 6, 12, or 18 months behind. And Shelley noted the importance of data in terms of information the government already has but doesn't use in terms of like hiring decisions, retention information, and retirement. So clearly there can be AI solutions that could help there. Lori was talking about networked government and kind of the exchange of information to improve the way the public sector functions. So I think there are many ways in which AI can help. A few months ago, I gave a talk to the Federal CIO Council about artificial intelligence, and most of the CIOs across the federal government want to do more on technology innovation. They want to embrace AI, but they admit the federal government is far behind. So this is an area where clearly there needs to be a lot of progress made. Second thing where I'm reasonably optimistic is I think there will be greater use of personal digital assistants. Like we're seeing this in the consumer market with Apple's Siri, Amazon's Alexa, and so on. Like these are devices that can help people find information, answer basic questions, and even perform common tasks like ordering takeout food. I think these are the types of devices that can be adapted for government agencies as well and help workers find information, answer basic questions. I'm sure all the agencies, especially the personnel offices, get a lot of questions over and over again. There are chatbots that can help answer those questions, and as opposed to having to fill out paperwork or submit forms or engage in activities that take a lot of time, there are electronic and digital solutions that I think can expedite the process. The Atlantic recently put out a report saying that by 2021, there actually are going to be more personal digital assistants around the world than human beings, which is a pretty startling number. By 2021, I think we're going to be around 7.5 billion humans. So that means there are going to be 7.5 billion personal digital assistants. The federal government should embrace that and start to think about things. Hollie, in her comments, mentioned the importance of bringing government and citizens closer together, and she gave a number of very good examples of how that can happen in terms of user testing groups. I know she's done work on participatory budgeting and allowing ordinary people to help decide priorities for their particular neighborhoods. We all know there's a problem in terms of civic engagement. There's a complete lack of public trust in the government. And so I think there are ways in which data can help with some of those issues, some of which is already happening, but there are other things that I think could and possibly will happen over the next 2 decades. So, for example, there is an organization called 4C, which currently does online surveys asking people to rate the government websites that they have visited online. And this organization basically puts out reports kind of analyzing people's digital experiences, allowing them to rate particular agencies in terms of the online performance. Like if you go to a website, can you actually find the information that you were requesting? If you wanted to engage in a transaction, were you able to complete the transaction? This is a great way to really promote greater accountability. Last year, I was in China and discovered a more individualized version of this type of performance assessment. Of course, the first government official that you meet when you go to a foreign country is at the airport in the form of the passport officer. So I went to this Chinese passport officer and then happened to glance down and notice that there was a small electronic device that allowed me to rate that individual on a 1 to 4 scale. And I thought, wow, that's amazing, that not only can you do what Forsey was doing, which is rating your online experiences, but they were asking me to rate this one government official. And you can only imagine what the Chinese government might be doing with that information. Like, you know, promoting the top 1% and exiling the bottom percent. Shelley did point out when we were talking earlier about this, the importance of context to those types of performance data, that you need other information in order to evaluate those very individualistic types of examples. You need to know kind of what the situation was and you know, what kind of environment that passport officer might be working to really assess the overall performance. And I think that is an important thing to include. But so I think there are lots of ways in which, if we kind of envision the federal government and the future workforce by 2040, where we can make progress, incorporate some of the new technologies, and hopefully help to address accountability, representation, and help to restore public confidence in government.
Okay, Dale, and we're going to start again with the panel, but here the question is, all of you have spelled out your vision, and I understand that. The next part of it is, how do we get there? So Dale and each of the panelists, but I'll start with you, and we have a lot of people out there in government, a lot of opinion leaders, a lot of thoughtful people. So what do people need to do specifically starting tomorrow to get to where we want to be? And how optimistic is the road going to be? And how long, but specific, what needs to be done? And your thoughts?
I think the key thing on technology innovation is it's not just about the technology. Like at Brookings, we do a lot of work at kind of evaluating how effective private organizations as well as public organizations are at incorporating new technology. The biggest mistake most government agencies make is just to bring in new technology and they don't change anything else. I think Lori pointed out that we need to also think about changing the organization of government, and then I would add we need to change the culture of government. I think when you look at examples of successful technology innovation, either in the public sector or the private sector, the examples of where it has worked the best is when there's new technology, organizational restructuring to take advantage of the new technology, and then changes in the culture so that people actually embrace that new technology and use it effectively. If you don't have each of those three ingredients, oftentimes the innovation is going to fail. So when you think about organizational changes within the federal government, we're going to need flatter organizations and more collaborative organizations. We need organizations where the flow of information is two-way. It's not just hierarchical from the leadership down to the employees. The employees, either at the very bottom of the organization or in the middle of the organization, they have experiences that can inform what goes on in that agency. It's kind of an updated version of the old suggestion box, but put in electronic form so that there are easy ways for people at the top of the organization, not just to put out information, but to get feedback on what works. So I think those are the types of things I would emphasize.
Thank you, Darrell. So now, Hollie, and one of the parts of my job I enjoyed is spending time with all these people on the panel and speaking to them individually and brainstorming. And Hollie, one of the things that we talked about is you can identify pockets of innovation right now in civic engagement. What troubles me is it isn't spreading very quickly because we had a hard time to come up with a lot of examples. So what's going to be the impetus to spread it, and what do people need to do at each of the level? I mean, you have a local government, state government, and the federal government. So what needs to happen to spread these kind of individual pockets of innovation?
I think it's a great question. So I think on a meta level, when we engage people, we need to actually be engaging them in a genuine capacity. And there needs to be a sense that people are having some autonomy or agency, and there's some sort of accountability or feedback loop. And I think that is a challenge when sometimes, the government does public engagement. And there's a lot of reasons to be concerned about it. Fear of opening the floodgates, fear of what I call going into a restaurant and only looking for the rats, concern that you're not going to be able to, on the back end, implement whatever kind of input that you get, and a lack of process investment so that you're asking people things that maybe they're not the right experts on. So I'm not going to be up here and say we need to crowdsource nuclear policy, for example, right? That's not the kind of thing that I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is creating institutionalized structures that tap into people's expertise, often in their community, but being realistic with having rules of the road that are transparent, which might mean saying, we're not going to take all of your input and turn it into actionable outcomes all the time. But sometimes there's a reluctance in the public sector to even manage those outcomes. So I think we have to be much more forthcoming and more realistic with people because they understand when their time is not being used wisely. And one of the threads that I'm hearing from this conversation today is when we think about data and the amount of data that individuals are generating that's being collected on them by public sector and private sector companies, that maybe is a way that we could think about in a federated structure of scaling participation if we could create genuine opportunities and mechanisms to empower people to feel like they have more agency over this information and how it's collected and how it's going to be used. That's just an example of something that I think will really resonate with the public, because I think you're right. There is a challenge of scale, and until we get to a place where we have greater institutionalization of engagement, the kind of catalytic dollars that social sector or philanthropic organizations are able to do are very powerful. And you're seeing that in the form of fellowships in local government, in the form of small pilots, in the form of challenges, but that are sort of smaller dollars, because the external actors can move a little bit more quickly and then show those kind of early wins that I think can ultimately create the kind of political air cover to move this along so that the government can say, we understand the necessity, we understand that we're not only going to be opening ourselves up to excessive risk, and then we can start making larger, more strategic process investments. Just to bring it full circle to what I was first saying, when you don't really invest in the process, neither of the parties feel like it's been a good use of their time, and then people are going to be even more reluctant to more deeply engage the public.
Good. Well, thank you. Now, for you, Laurie, one of the things I enjoyed about your chapter is your 3 kinds of jobs in the future. So would you share with the audience your vision for 3 types of jobs? And I wasn't sure if it's only 3 types of jobs, that we ought to make the federal government simplified. You're either one of your 3 jobs. And then the question is, how do we get there to only have 3 types of jobs in government?
Okay, well, thank you. I did realize that I completely missed talking about what my vision is for the future. So I want to raise those issues. I talked about the as is and not the to be. So here's sort of the vision that I see for network government. By 2040, government will have realized that technology is the lever to understanding the constituency. That society's allegiance to bytes is the means through which government can connect to its constituency. And so that the advances in technology will enable the government to better aggregate data, but to better gain more insights and analyze that, to lay out a compelling picture of everything from how we should, what risks society should take to what it chooses to buy. And then, so for the first time, government will be taking sort of a first order look at how its policies, governance, and structure can be really informed by someone, flipping a switch. How will we design our future transport hubs based on relevant data? So the government will reshape its infrastructure, its distribution of responsibilities, and technology investment to more directly engage the American public. And so it's going to be, the structure will be less focused on the institution and more on communities of interest and this redistribution of responsibilities. So now I'm going to talk about those three.
Jobs, yeah.
And essentially, the three jobs are, it's going to be reorganized around the data lifecycle and decision-making around that. So basically, anyone who has a role in aggregating, analyzing, integrating data, this will is focused on them. So basically, it will require a data management function, which is crowdsourcing citizen input and aggregating that data. And then the knowledge integration management function is sort of taking a cross-discipline approach to analyzing that data. And then the customized services management function, which tailors programs to individuals' needs. So for the data management function, this is really this crowdsourcing. It will require reaching into the technology and scientific communities to better understand emerging technology, such as virtual reality, IoT, AI, and how we can aggregate and analyze unstructured and structured data to better amass even larger amounts of it. We need to reimagine and reorganize data sensing and feedback loops so that the government can gain rich insights from citizens to inform knowledge-driven decisions. And we need to understand how to develop crowdsourcing mechanisms to elicit better participation in policy and acquisition processes, creating data lakes and things like that. So there will be active crowdsourcing where the government will push surveys to people through social media, passive crowdsourcing, which we see in smart cities, sensors, IoT around town. And then the knowledge integration management function. So this is essentially taking a cross-discipline approach to analyzing data. And so we really want to make sure that we're involving cross-discipline communities to investigate ever-evolving citizen needs. And once we're crowdsourcing the data, this will really trigger government processes to move in different ways, resources, and develop responsive solutions. So the customized services management function, this is really tailoring programs to citizens' needs. It's really, we're seeking tech-enabled feedback mechanisms to understand constituents' changing values. And once we need to make sure that we're understanding the privacy and security implications of aggregating this data. So that will be a focus as well. And so then once we have this data, then we're going to be providing solutions tailored to the relevant community of interest. So, we also want to involve the public in how they're designing their solutions around their data. So it could be, more 4D printing, creating objects that reshape themselves and self-assemble over time. So.
Well, thank you. Now for Shelley, who I've known for a long time, and the thing I've enjoyed about Shelley is she isn't shy, and she has a lot of opinions. So Shelley, we have a good audience for you, people involved in federal data. Will you please tell them what they should do tomorrow to get to our vision for 2040? And I know you're not shy to speak out on issues.
Well, and it doesn't hurt that you actually asked me to think about this, so let me identify 4 things I talk about in the chapter. Okay. First one is fuel the front line. Fuel as in gas, right? Give it gas. So way too much of what we do with data is gathering data from the field and bringing it into the central office and going beyond just bringing it in for feedback, but actually getting it back out. So I always like to say, return data to the data suppliers with value added through analysis. You'll be surprised at how much the quality of the data improves. But if you think about the teachers and how we give them the data right now, they get measured and they get worried that they're going to get penalized. But who's helping them find the positive outliers for the demographic group that they're teaching so that they can say, oh, let me try and do that. Whether it's data or it's research, we aren't very good at whether it's public works folks or teachers or social workers. How do we fuel the front line? Think about the UPS driver coming to your house who's sitting there with this little handheld PDA that tells them a whole lot of stuff, right? We don't do that very much. Annie E. Casey has done some really interesting stuff trying to work with the social workers in Indiana to make this work. So fuel the front line, and I would add to that what Hollie was talking about, which is an awful lot of what government does, you can engage others in being part of the solution. And if we actually learn how to use data to fuel not only the front line, but others who can be part of improving outcomes, making the world work better. Second thing is outcomes. And I say outcome obsession, right? Government needs to be outcomes obsessed. Which, what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, you've got to focus on mission. And I will take from the, Margaret Weichert will probably talk about this later, mission, service, and stewardship, fiscal stewardship. I know there's some people in the audience who are going, oh my God, I can't believe Shelley's saying that. Really short, sweet, to the point. Outcome indicators, multiple dimensions of outcomes. So it is mission, are you making progress on what you're trying to do, which means you have to be clear about what it is you're trying to advance, right? Whether it is safe drinking water or it is reducing risks from, extreme weather events, or it is helping kids thrive in life, you've got to be clear about it and figure out what the measurements are that are going to help you know that. You also need to think about process efficiency. If your benefits processing is going really slow, because you're not paying attention, things are in the queue, the wait queue a long time, people are going to get frustrated, but also if you're not looking at the data, you're going to miss opportunities to improve. There's service quality. That's something that matters. If you have bad experiences with government, you're going to get mad at government more generally. And usually it is a very limited number of places where we actually have direct, highly recognized experiences with government, so service quality should be incredibly important. Fairness, we have to have people feel that they're being treated fairly relative to others. And then of course there's the cost issue, is that, hey, are we asking, okay, to achieve this, is there a better way to do the same or more with less money? So outcomes obsession on the multiple dimensions of outcomes, visualization and communication. If we got data and we got analyses and we got research findings and nobody knows about them or can't understand them, can't interpret them, what are we going to do? So, I'd urge you to sort of think about, okay, who needs to use the data? Who needs the analysis? Where do they need it? When do they need it? How do they need it? How do I get it to them in a timely way so they can access it, so they know it's available, et cetera? So thinking more about visualization and communication, absolutely critical. And then finally, I think there's some low-hanging fruit. Most of what government does is good stuff you want to have grow and bad stuff you want to slow. And on the bad stuff, an awful lot of that is incidents, bad incidents, harmful incidents, whether it's the traffic fatalities, a plane crash, a fire, whatever. We actually have a lot of expertise about doing this sort of mission-related risk management, but we're not as good as that as we can, and we're not doing enough of it, where we're learning across agencies and actually building intelligence kind of platforms that help us do that. So I think those are 4 huge opportunities. I want to pick up on Lori's question and get this whole group of thinkers here thinking about, how do you actually make this happen? What is the institutional, what are the organizational, in this hierarchical governments that exist, how do you make them agile, both in terms of use of data, use of resources? So just take 2 things I've brought up. One is the clean drinking water, safe drinking water, and Social Security Administration, and ask yourselves, how should we be organizing government to deliver on that? How do we make it agile? We don't necessarily need to change the existing organizational structures, but we got to figure out how to make them more agile, or we have to change them. But again, looking at Social Security, it's like, think about how Amazon changes its computer systems. It's got people in-house who are constantly doing agile improvements. Do we have to contract that out in government to get good people helping us with that? Not easy questions to answer, so I think we need to figure that out, and I hope you'll all take on those challenges.
Okay, does any of the panel have questions for each other?
I'll ask Lori that.
I told you she isn't shy, guys.
Yeah, I'll ask Lori the question I just asked. Just imagine your Social Security or whatever. How would you organize that, where you're protecting the people in government who are great, who have expertise, where they sometimes need new skill sets, but also where you've got a Congress, let's stick with feds for a bit, that wants to know that their money went where they did. And you got IGs who are saying you spent it on this when you should have spent it on this. And you got all these oversight structures that make it hard to be agile.
I think it all comes down to doing these foresight exercises to say, really, what should we envision in the future, and what knowledge do we need to be accumulating right now to be able to get there? And that's even, what does the structure of government look like? And we're already seeing that technology is being, decentralized. Everyone has, a smartphone or something like this. So we're becoming smarter in the ways we want to access and use data. And so I think it's, really thinking longer term to make decisions now.
Good. Any other thing? Because Hollie, but how would you answer, Hollie, about the same question about how would you do it? Because citizens now, they have phones. I get a lot of emails, again, from the city of Alexandria, and they're asking for surveys. So do you see that all interrelated? Are we heading to someplace else?
I think it's a great question. I think it's probably a component of it. So I thought, Darrell's point about the surveys on different government websites, and you've seen, grade.dc.gov, you've seen a bunch of this kind of, getting input for how we think about those sort of user interfaces. I think that's one component of it. I think I would caution against relying as that being the only facet of this, and I think there's two related concerns. So we are seeing a lot of IoT devices and sensors popping up, and you're seeing cities actually using these devices to change how they're doing public service delivery. So, Boston is really advanced and thinking about using these devices. So actually when you're in your car on your phone, it can report when you're hitting a speed bump or a pothole and then send that back to City Hall. And one thing that concerns me about that is that citizens then don't know what's happening. They don't understand on the back end that there are real people in government agencies who are then doing work for them. So I think we want to just caution about this sort of invisible effect because, as Shelley was saying, there are a lot of hardworking people in government who are doing a lot of great services. And so the blending, just bringing it full circle to Don Kettle, when you think about this interweaving of the public and the private sector and the blending of these spheres, part of the crisis of legitimacy is that people don't know what's public and they don't know what role government is playing. And so if we're only constantly getting, kind of passive survey information, right? Government is not Amazon by design. We're not just giving you a product to your door. And so the rating system, I think it's a component, but I would just caution us about overly relying on it because it creates this analogy with the commercial sector that I don't think is totally adequate because the public sector can do things or operate at a loss or think about vulnerable communities or invest in public works projects or think about any sort of collective action dilemma that is very different from the private sector. So that's sort of my only caution against that.
And Darrell, who's doing any of this well now, either at the federal, state, or local level? Or the people, is there anybody who's impressed you in recent days that you've seen them actually doing the things you're talking about all over the world?
Well, the more technically oriented agencies actually are doing a good job. So Shelley gave the example of NOAA and just all the weather information that we have that, commercial stations use all the time. NASA has done an amazing job in terms of cloud storage facilities. Like their workforce is distributed all around the world. The data collection is global in nature. They have devised a technology infrastructure that makes use of that. And when you think about scientific discoveries over the last 2 decades, I mean, it's amazing what is coming out of it. But I can also give you an example of an agency that's doing a terrible job of this, which is DC city government. So for example, I live in the U Street area, and we have a rat problem. Not the humankind, but the four-legged variety. So I noticed a few years ago when I started to notice all these rats in the alley behind our place that DC city government had created new electronic ways to report problems online, 911 and 311. So of course I took advantage of these digital resources to report the problem. In 3 years, I've never heard any response. I've never seen any improvement in terms of the problem at hand. And so it's an example of where an agency is taking the first step of creating a mechanism for feedback, but not altering its structure or culture in a way that actually takes advantage of that information or acts on that information. And if anything, that's an example of how technology actually increases citizen cynicism, because when you create these mechanisms and when people start using it, you expect something's going to happen. And then when nothing happens, it's like, oh my God, well, government is ineffective, it doesn't work, it's not responsive to my concerns. It actually makes the problem worse. So that's an example we need to avoid.
How about for you, Shelley?
So I just have to pick up on that in defense of the DC government.
That's going to be hard to defend on the rat problem.
So I'm going to suggest to you and everyone who agrees with you to go look at the DC government at the rat stat session, which they have online and videoed, which is really interesting. Now, it's not as frequent enough, but I think what this illustrates is how do we communicate to the citizens so they actually know what we're working on, and they trust. You trust your government. I mean, I actually send people there when they're talking about stat sessions. I said, here's one in progress. Go look at it, But your point is well taken, because you don't know that. You notified them, they never got back to you, and what's the ongoing thing? So I think that's a big part of our challenge. And as I think about the government, federal, state, or local, I think about whose job is it to do this, and how do we organize? So another great, Health and Human Services has done a pretty good strategy map on opioid abuse reduction, where they talk about the relevant evidence and the different strategies they're using within HHS. It doesn't go across the whole federal government, which is unfortunate. But you look at it and you go, well, how do we get people at the local level who could use this to actually know about it? And I think that's the challenge, and that's a really big challenge because it's federal, state, local. How do you manage that? But we're at this time right now with artificial intelligence, with data, with visualization that makes this possible, but we're going to need new skill sets, and we're going to need to retrain people, and we're going to need to open up an agility within the workforce to be able to move to teams and to move money with those teams to deal with real problems.
We got some questions from the audience. So, and one of them is for you, Darrell, which actually is the topic of your paper, which I received in the email from Brookings. In the area of artificial intelligence, you really have 5 things that both the private sector and the federal sector have to do. Can you kind of quickly explain the 5 things? Because I think there is concern in the audience and all over about AI doing some bad things.
Yes, certainly there are many opportunities for AI, but there are a lot of concerns about it as well in terms of the societal impact, the ethical nature, or perhaps lack of ethical aspects. So at Brookings, we have launched a new AI initiative to kind of look at both the usage side, but also the problems are associated with it. And so we put out a report that Mark just referenced, and since you love these emails, we're going to keep sending you stuff. And what we did was, it was a report kind of looking at what companies can do, because obviously the tech companies are the big innovators with AI. It's not likely there's going to be national legislation on this anytime soon. So in the short run, our hope as a society is that the companies start to incorporate ethics more in their AI decisions. So, for example, we suggested that companies hire ethicists, just so there are people within the company who can weigh in on differing applications, different use cases, and make sure that ethical considerations are incorporated. That companies should develop a code of ethics that lays out their principles, processes, and ways of handling the ethical aspects of AI development. We suggest the development of AI review boards that can basically look at the decisions that are being made and make sure that they're meeting general societal values. that there be AI audit trails. So obviously, most AI software involves millions of lines of code. So you can't really go into the code and analyze what choices were made, and did the programmers make the right ethical decisions or whatever. But software developers can annotate their software and basically explain the choices they made at different stages of the software development, and that can create an audit trail. So if there's any problem or controversy about that AI, or if the AI ends up producing some negative consequence of some sort, we can go back and recreate the kinds of decisions that went into that software. In August, we actually did a public opinion survey testing these various ideas. There was strong majority support for every one of these ideas. Some of them, like a code of ethics and an AI review board, had up to 67% of the general public supporting them.
Good. What I'd like to do now is go through the final round and get some data from all of you on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being highly optimistic and 1 being highly pessimistic. Where would you place yourself on the future, on looking to 2040? And I like the idea of 2040. It's a nice round number, and it isn't today. So tell me about the future. So on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being highly optimistic, how do you think we are going to do to get there? We'll start off with you, Shelley, and I'm going to write down the data.
3.
Okay. Lori?
4.
4. Okay.
4.
5.
5. So would you like to explain that? And then I'll ask you. No.
Yes, of course
Shelley,
I will. I'm a
Okay.
long-term optimist in the sense that I just think the status quo is indefensible. I think when you look historically, whenever things are bad, and I think all of us would admit that there are things in government that are currently bad, just in terms of poor governance, lack of proper procedures, limited innovation within the public sector. I just don't think that's a status quo that can last another 20 years. And so I think when you look at organizational change, typically when things are bad, that actually is when change becomes possible. And I think change is going to be necessary because the pace of technology innovation is really going to accelerate over the next 20 years. And I don't think the federal government can not be a part of that.
And Shelley, so what will it take to get your 3 to a 4?
So I think there's enormous will within the federal government, state governments, local governments. I think the change is a little easier at the state and local level. I think it's especially hard at the federal level because there are all sorts of drivers that protect the status quo and very few drivers that encourage constructive change. So whether it is the fact that there's no real competition like you have in the private sector that's going to change it, the fact that both the media and the political system have a bias to the negative, and the evidence on this is incredibly both the negative and the sensational. The fact that you have in place a whole bunch of risk management systems that, like I said, the IGs and even the grant oversight mechanisms, et cetera, that make it easier to focus on compliance rather than mission improvement. So there's about 5, 6, 7, 8 barriers to change that are hard to change. And so you got to hope that the will to change, both from within government and outside government, as well as the technology and opportunity and the models. But again, and I think the organizational structures make it really difficult. But I picked 3 because I'm an optimist.
Well, I'd like to thank the panel for a terrific afternoon. I'd like to thank the panel for a really good experience with preparing this book. And I'd like to thank the IBM Center out there for a good 20 years. I've had a good time, and I've enjoyed this afternoon, and I've enjoyed the past 20 years. And thank you all. Good.